people imagine the 20s were when you're supposed to have some sort of identity crisis. And, when you put it in those terms, it sounds like it's got to be sort of this awful philosophical experience where, you just don't know what you're going to be. And then a light bulb comes on and then and then you're forever that thing. And that's just not the way the 20s work.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults, and we also talk about being thriving adults ourselves. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. Here on the podcast, I share my experiences parenting 5 now adult kids and working with thousands more as a summer camp director for the past 4 decades. I'm the author of Happy Campers, and I love sharing encouragement and ideas for living more positive, connected lives. Topics I researched extensively for my master's in psychology and continue to explore today. I created this podcast as a place to share what I've learned and to encourage us all to raise and be thriving adults. Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode of the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. I am thrilled today to have Meg Jay, PhD, on the podcast. Meg is a developmental clinical psychologist who specializes in 20-somethings. She's the author of The 20-Something Treatment, a revolutionary remedy for an uncertain age, Supernormal, The Secret World of the Family Hero, and the cult classic, The Defining Decade, Why Your 20s Matter and How to Make the Most of Them. Her books have been translated into more than a dozen languages, and her work has appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, and on NPR, BBC, and maybe most importantly for her audience, TikTok. So I'm excited to welcome Meg to the podcast.
Hi, Audrey. Thank you for having me.
So today I'm really excited about your next book, which you were so kind to send to me. But today I want to talk to you about this one, The Defining Decade, Why Your 20s Matter Most. I've explained to you on several of our emails that we've corresponded on over the past couple of years that your book is a cult classic in my own family.
Awesome.
So I have 5 adult kids right now. They range from 20 to my oldest will be 30 in January. And as is probably typical for an oldest child, maybe, she read your book before she turned 20 and started
get going.
Yeah. And she has since done a couple of different book clubs, most recently with some of our camp staff. That was last summer. And so many great insights from your book and things that my kids often will tell me back. So I finally read your book. I actually listened to the audio version just in the past couple of months after hearing from my kids so much. And oh my gosh, first of all, you should read it even if you're not in your 20s.
Well, it is sort of the science of adult development. I was just trying to get the information out there early, but it all absolutely applies in your 30s, 40s, 50s, for sure. Yes.
Yeah. So I would say it's never too late to pick up this book because you even talk about in the book how it kind of varies a little bit for people. Like some people, it's more like 25 to 35 and some it's, but it's just that range of that time that's just so critical. So can you just talk for a minute, just why this particular age and time of life is just so important?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing people ask me when I tell them I work with 20-somethings is they say, why? And as someone who knows the research and has been doing this for 25 years, my answer is, how could you not? That the 20s are really where all the action is. I mean, this is when people are figuring out who they're going to be and what they're going to do for work and where they're going to live and who they're going to love and what their identities are going to be. And I mean, it's just this incredible time of growth and change. So that makes it a very difficult time for 20-somethings, but also a very rewarding time to work with young people because you can kind of get in on all the action that's happening. We know that something like 80% of our most defining decisions and life choices happen by the age of 35. So when I'm working with 20-somethings, I'm getting in on some of the biggest decisions they're ever going to make and helping them think through those things. And so it's a pretty important time when a lot's really happening.
That's got to feel so rewarding to get when you get those calls like a few years later from some of these young adults that you've helped. And you talk about a few of them in the book. And I was especially interested in hearing kind of when they circle back with you, like, wow, I'm so glad you helped me figure this out. And look where I am now. And there was a story about a guy with his job search and how he didn't want to be pinned down. But by not being pinning down, he was getting himself stuck where he didn't have many options. And it's just really, really interesting. Today, what I really want, there's a couple things. There's so many things in the book. I highly recommend it. I really recommend it for every young adult. And we will continue to be doing book clubs with our camp staff. And I think I also told you in an email, my youngest son, who's only 20, is a sophomore in college, and he got some of his roommates and friends to read it. I don't know if he's had the book club yet. So he's trying to do a book club. So I was, as a kind of the final for this Tough 20s series, I was going to have my oldest and my youngest on together, talking about the book clubs they've done, talking about their insights from the book on either end of the decade. So like I said, we're super fans of your work, and it's so, as a parent, and I think other parents of young adults will agree, it's so nice to have other people's voices.
Yeah.
Speaking into our kids with sort of just, objective research, because I think as parents, we can get a little too caught up in kind of our own ideas about what kids should be doing.
And if you're not, your kids think you are. So, it's not, it's just, I have two teenagers and people say, wow, what is it like for them to have, Meg Jay as a mom? And I say, I've raised two very normal teenagers. They're not the least bit interested in anything that I have to say. So everybody else's kids are, though. So that works out. So I know what you mean is that sometimes, actually, there's some interesting research on this that's in my next book about how the brain kind of in adolescence, before adolescence, the mother's voice is the most sort of stimulating to the brain. And after adolescence, no, it's tuned out, and it's outsiders' voices that are more interesting. So that's, literally what happens. And so that works out for all the millions of parents out there who, might like to talk to their kids about some of these things, but maybe the kids aren't feeling it. But that's what my job is, and that's what I've done for 25 years. So it's a pretty great job to have.
That's so awesome and really funny, because I've had a similar experience being a summer camp director, where the families at camp are like, when you tell my kids about this friendship skill, they really listen to you. But then when I try to talk to them, and I'm like, well, don't worry, because my own kids, just
exactly
aren't as interested. But then they'll read a book about something that I've been talking about, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I read this great thing. And I'm like,
right. Yep, that is the way.
So I was especially interested because we've been talking a lot recently at camp, especially about telling our stories, and how not only is just that a way to kind of get to the heart of like our why for whatever we're doing, but also helps us with kind of developing more empathy for other people. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about, just to share about when you talk about identity capital and how young adults build that, and sort of that idea of crafting their story. So just some general ideas of when you're talking to these young adults and kind of helping them, because I do think when you start with not having thought about that, it's hard for these young adults to really pinpoint, well, what is my story? And I would just love for you to just touch on that. And that really can be the bulk of what you share with us today. And I think the rest of it could be, they can read the book.
Right. Yes, please do. Yeah. So identity capital is sort of the concept that, for a lot of years, people imagined the 20s were when you're supposed to have some sort of identity crisis. And, when you put it in those terms, it sounds like it's got to be sort of this awful philosophical experience where, you just don't know what you're going to be. And then a light bulb comes on, and then and then you're forever that thing. And that's just not the way the 20s work anymore. If they ever worked that way, I don't know. That would have been before my time. But, these days I encourage college students, 20-somethings, young adults, just to not worry about who they're going to be always and forever, but to think more about spending their time earning identity capital. That, when you're young, time is your most valuable resource. That's what you have that I don't have. And so your identity capital tells people how you chose to spend it. And are you taking jobs or having hobbies or doing something in college that adds value to who you are? I think sometimes 20 somethings get stressed out about, should I take this job? Should I take that job? Like it's the last time they'll ever be able to make that decision. On average, young adults have 9 different jobs by the age of 35. So those are 9 different pieces of identity capital. So I just tell people, hey, just go one piece of identity capital at a time, go do something, see how that adds value to who you are, sort of increases your skill set. Let it be an investment in yourself. And when it feels like it's not that anymore, it may be time to move on to your next piece of identity capital. So that's the concept. The other piece of what you're talking about, I see a lot where young adults who are, 20, 25 will say, I don't have any identity capital. And, my response is that is not possible unless they, fell off a spaceship onto Earth the day before. I mean, they've been doing stuff for the last 5 or 10 years. So there's capital, but they probably just have never thought about what that is. So in the updated version of the Defining Decade, it's the one with the gray cover. And if you listen to it on audiobook, that's the one you would have heard because it's been updated. In the back, there's a section for book clubs because it's a very popular book club book. And there's exercises around sort of, identifying your identity capital. And that often means pulling out, paper and pencil or your phone and your thumbs, thinking about how have I spent my time? What are the jobs that I've had? What are the hobbies that I've had? What are the trips that I've taken? What have I learned from those? What are the challenges that I've, overcome in my life? What was my major and why? And so it takes some self-reflection to realize everybody has identity capital and everybody has a story. And, young people's stories are still being written, but everybody has something so far. So sometimes, that's usually requires a fair bit of self-reflection. And it can be a good thing to do with a friend or even in a book club setting because people see things about us that we don't see. They say, oh my gosh, but you're so this or you're so that. And that's unique about you. And that's one of your strengths. I actually told a client who was in my office a couple of weeks ago, she said she didn't have any soft skills. And I think the only thing she could imagine that was a soft skill was public speaking. That's like the only soft skill anybody can think of. But there are many soft skills. And so I said, well, I think coming in, like seeking good advice and taking it, like that's a skill. You're good at doing that. And she really is. She's very proactive. If there's something wrong in her life, she'll come in, she'll ask for advice, she'll go out, she'll do it. So I said, that's a skill. Seeking feedback, implementing feedback, you have that skill. And that was something that, she couldn't see, but I could see. So anyway, it can take a little bit of self-reflection and sometimes conversation with other people to start making our list and writing our stories, but everybody has capital. Everybody has a story.
Yeah, for sure. What I especially loved when you were talking about your outward bound experience. And that really resonated and something that we have. So we have some really outstanding young adults who've worked at our camp and kind of come back for several years and gotten into more leadership roles where they're, helping support and coach younger staff. And we have this one guy and he was talking last summer, we were just doing a little interview and he was talking about how he's starting a job as an engineer, I believe with, some big company, right? He just started this fall and he came and worked one final summer at camp and he had worked every summer at camp, had his engineering degree. And he said, similar to what you shared in your book, when he was doing the interviews, he was really able to translate all of the kind of interpersonal and leadership skills. So he came across as this guy that was very going to be a great team member and everything else because they're like, you already know how to do the engineering stuff. And he did some kind of internship stuff during the school year. But it was really interesting to have him talk because we do hear from a lot of our counselors, like they'll come for 1 year as a counselor and then say, oh, I have to go get an internship in my major.
Right.
And so then they, which is fine. Not everybody needs to stay at camp or outward bound for forever, but they sometimes miss a kind of an opportunity for growth and to continue developing some of that identity capital that you talk about and relationships that they have kind of started building. So that when you were telling that story, I was like, yes, because when you were interviewing, tell about when you were interviewing for your PhD programs.
Yeah, I went to when I was applying to grad school for PhD in clinical psych, which for people who don't know is ridiculously competitive. And I think my year there were, 500 applicants and they took 5 people. So how are you going to be one of those 5? I was one of those 5, but I went in all ready to talk about school and research and this and that. And, people had looked at my resume and I saw that I had done 5 years as an Outward Bound instructor, and everybody just wanted to talk about Outward Bound. They were like, oh my gosh, tell me about Outward Bound. What's that like? And, I have to admit, as a young person, I don't think I fully understood what I can see it now that meant. I was a leader. I was self-directed. I was, self-sufficient, a hard worker, able to sort of deal with life however it comes. I mean, I can easily translate that now. It was harder for me at the time. So I hope camp owners and people out there who have young employees take some time with them at the end of the summer and help them make a list of all the skills that they acquired. Because I do think they can do 4 years of camp counselor and not understand how incredibly valuable that's going to be in the workplace. As a matter of fact, both of my kids are required by mom to work at least one summer as a camp counselor. Absolutely, because they're both extremely smart, which is really cool, but there's a lot of smart kids out there, and companies want people who can have a conversation, who can, lead a group, who can roll with the punches. I mean, they want more than just book smarts. And I think that's what you get through Outward Bound or through being a camp counselor. I think being in charge of younger people is really important. So both of my kids are required to spend at least one summer as a camp counselor. And they'll love it. I mean, they've been going to camp their whole life. So this is not exactly a heavy lift for them, but we're all in agreement that it's great.
That's amazing. And I think, you have that experience yourself, so you understand that. I think a lot of parents don't have a reference point of understanding what that kind of experience might be like and what they learn from it. You would probably be interested that some research that the American Camp Association has done through the University of Utah to try to determine what are the actual impacts of camp. And it was asking people, what contribution did your camp experiences kind of make? And the unique contribution that kept coming up was relationship skills, relational skills. Because when you think about it, camp is one of the few places right now where kids and young adults are not on their phones. And you talk about that also in your book. And so lots of FaceTime.
Right. Mm-hmm. And having to be away from home and figure it out. And, it's like going to college every summer. I mean, that's what I love about it. And I work at UVA 1 day a week at student health, rain or shine, I'm over there. And I mean, it doesn't come up with every client or in every session, but I would say in general, the students who've been to camp, they come to college and they have a pretty easy transition because they're accustomed to showing up and going, okay, I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to get along with people and I'm going to live with people I've never met and I'm going to be away from home. And so you won't find a bigger fan of camp than me.
We need to get you to the national conference.
I know you do. That'd be a great idea.
We really do. I'm going to reach out to them because seriously, so right now, young adults, it's hard to get them to work. Weirdly to say, the young adults, the 20-year-olds that are starting college. And I think it's hard for some parents to if they're at college, also let them be away for the summer.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's that ambivalence as a parent. You of course love your kids and love seeing them and everything. So it's a little bit hard as a parent to encourage another thing that doesn't include you.
Right.
Away from home. So, but I really appreciate that. Why don't we take a moment just as we finish up to tell us about your new book, because it sounds like this is going to be another must read for young adults and another book club that we'll need to be doing. So tell us about the new book, when it's coming out, what it's about.
So the next book, it's called The 20-Something Treatment. The subtitle is A Revolutionary Remedy for an Uncertain Age, and it's specifically about young adult mental health. Everybody's talking about mental health now, which is great, but some conversations are more helpful than others, I think. And so I'm really, a lot of people email me and they say, how can I be your client? How can I find a therapist like you? What kind of therapist are you? Like what are you doing and how are you doing it? And really, I'm a developmental clinical psychologist. So my approach to mental health in 20 somethings is, developmentally anchored. And so the 20 something treatment is about how I work with young adults around mental health issues and really about sort of normalizing most of the struggles out there this is normal developmental depression and anxiety and trying to fix some problems with substances when maybe we could be fixing them with something else. And really kind of normalizing a lot of the struggles that people have. I think in the media, usually 20 somethings are trivialized, like, they're snowflakes and they're so fragile and they can't handle anything. Or they go to the doctor's office and they are immediately given a diagnosis and a prescription. And, what I'm doing is really normalizing the struggles and saying it's hard to be young. I mean, people think it's hard to be older. It's really hard to be young. There's a lot of uncertainty and people are figuring out how to do all the things they've never done before. And so, I try to get young adults to kind of put that in perspective, to not jump to conclusions about what's wrong with them and what will always be wrong with them. Most of my clients don't have disorders. They have problems that need to be solved. And so we try to do that together. And that's what the book is all about.
Oh my gosh. Well, perfect timing.
So yeah, there's a lot. I had a client in my office today who said, and I won't go into detail about, but let's just say she was a very sweet, mellow, timid college student. And she said, "Do you think I have bipolar disorder?" And I said, 100% no. Where did you get that idea? And she said, "Well, I've seen a lot of videos about it." And, there's just there's a lot more information out there about mental health than it's ever been out there before. And it's normal for young adults to see themselves in everything. But most young adults are not disordered. They're not broken. They're just having a hard time. And so the book is about how to kind of put that in a developmental perspective.
Well, yeah, and that's great. And it seems like as well, life is just kind of hard. And so another thing that you're getting ready for as in your 20s is how those challenges, how you respond, what are your coping strategies that are healthy so that when you're 45 or 50 or whatever it is. So we're starting to build those habits and skills, I think, younger that will help in the future.
I mean, that's what I, tell people all the time. All the stuff you're struggling with now, it will always be there. But the 10th time your boss puts a meeting on the calendar, you stop thinking you're going to be fired. The first time you're sure you're going to be fired. Maybe the fourth time you're sure you're going to be fired. By the fifth time, you can say, okay, the previous 4 times he put a meeting on my calendar, I wasn't fired. So even though I feel anxious, it's probably okay. And so, life, you're right, does continue to be difficult. In general, people get better at dealing with it. But, I think it's hard in your 20s when everything is uncertain, nothing is settled, everything's up for grabs. It's a great time for me to work with people, but it's a tough time to, be young.
Well, if I have you back on, we'll have to talk about social media because I think that's a whole nother thing that we're seeing, at camp. We're being off those things. We hear from everybody is a huge benefit. And I think that exacerbates this whole thing where you're having struggles, you're not feeling confident in your job, your relationships, these different things that you're working on. And then you have this perception that everyone else has it all together, which is totally false. So
it's not helping for sure. And there's a chapter for all you listeners who are going to run out and read The Defining Decade. There's a couple of chapters in the book about that, including taking students on a trip on a ship where there was no internet, and boy, did they love it. And it was really lovely. So, but, since life isn't like that, we just all have to figure out, how am I going to manage my relationship with my devices?
Absolutely. Well, Meg, this was incredible, as I suspected. Thank you so much for the incredible, work that you're doing. You are helping so many people. And I hope that many more listeners will pick up your book. And I know that we will continue to utilize this book and for sure your new one with our young adult staff. And I'll encourage other camps to do the same.
Thanks, Audrey. Take care.
Thanks for being on. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. As always, you can find notes and links in the show notes and at sunshine-parenting.com. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate you either sharing it with a friend or giving Sunshine Parenting a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I also invite you to read or listen to my book, Happy Campers: 9 Summer Camp Secrets for Raising Kids Who Become Thriving Adults. It's provided encouragement and simple strategies for building character traits and social skills to more than 3,000 readers so far. Happy Campers is available as an audiobook and in print or digital wherever you buy your books. Here's to raising and being thriving adults.